Okay. Welcome everybody to our study of the Pathwork lectures. And today we're going to be reading Self-Esteem, which I put in the email, but I don't remember now what exactly. I think it's 179 or something like that in the regular. But I'm reading from the Pathwork of Self-Transformation, a little compilation of sort of best loved lectures of the Pathwork. And so These lectures came from a medium by the name of Eva Pierakkos, and she was, trained to become a channel, and then she was over in Europe, and then moved here, and then this being, I think, came through. The first couple of lectures were in German, but then she started learning English, and so the rest of the lectures were here and in English. And they've been, like really understood to be a very profound and, deep uh, way of talking about our spiritual journey and our spiritual path. I want to just back up a second and share, like, there's on Netflix, there's this movie on Allan Kardec. I don't know if people are familiar with him, but in Brazil, he's very well known, and he was the founder or the father of Spiritism. And he was in France originally, and became involved he was quite a skeptic at the beginning, but was invited by people to, listen to, these spirits that were, answering questions. And at first they were using kind of tables and, like spelling things out, but then they started working with mediums. And he had like there were two girls together that would channel, and kind of like write. There was a one medium who, would speak directly, and then there was one other, I think. But anyway, he would ask them all simultaneously the same question, and they would, write the answers. And he published the answers to this, great many questions that people would ask, like all about the spirit world, all about the purpose of life, all about the earth and incarnation, and the spiritual journey. And so it's in this book called the Spirits Book by Allan Kardec. And if people, this is kind of the tradition in some ways that Eva came out of. And I find that it's interesting to read very similar things that the guide has said from these other sources. So if anybody wants, and it was kind of fun to watch the movie, about the challenges that he faced in trying to, you know, prove the existence of spirits, right? So anyway, that said, let's go ahead and jump into the lecture. So this is a little commentary before the lecture in the parentheses by the editors. And so it says, the guide once said that when human beings hate and reject themselves, the angels weep. So, I want to pause there and see if we can really sort of take that in, because we have such an unconscious habit of hating and rejecting ourselves. And he goes on to say, we've heard but forget too easily that as incarnated souls, we are divine manifestations. We tend to identify that part of our nature which we like least as our true, permanent, most essential selves, right? So, and it's this kind of confusion in our self-identification that begins to create this issue. This assumption has dire consequences, as the guide will explain. In this very uplifting lecture, he teaches us how to find our true identity in our ever-changing live core, discovering infinite possibilities in ourselves for making positive choices. We come to respect and love ourselves. So greetings, my dearest friends. Blessings for every one of you here. May your heart be open. May your attention be focused so that you can absorb as much as possible in this hour. Self-esteem, self-liking, or self-value, whatever you call it, is sorely lacking in every human being who experiences feelings of uncertainty, fear, insecurity, guilt, weakness, doubt, negativity, inadequacy, and inferiority. To the degree these feelings are present, self-esteem is inevitably lacking. Only this is not directly recognized. Such ignorance is all the more damaging, for you are then less capable of tackling the problem directly. Only considerable insight into the self brings the direct awareness of I do not like and respect myself. So, you might tune in for a second and just kind of, we're, many beings, we have many different positions and attitudes and, states and, voices within us. So, just stay in this moment now, but, notice like if there's anything that resonates in that, can you find that part of you even now, that has some issue, does not like and respect yourself? Or conversely, can you identify, some of these feelings like that he identifies as part of this issue of lacking self-esteem? So does that make sense? Anybody want to comment or question here? So the inner conflict between self-indulgence and self-rejection. People are constantly confronted with an inner and rarely conscious conflict about this recognition. The conflict arises out of the dualistic perception characteristic of humanity. I often have shown how a misconception splits the truth into two opposing halves that confuse you and make it impossible for you to make satisfying choices. And he talks in other lectures about how where we're split, we kind of run into this damned if we do, damned if we don't kind of situation where there is no satisfying choice. And in that, he also talks about, how we need to recognize that there's, truth and distortion in both sides. Here's somebody new coming in. Just give her a minute so she can connect to audio. Jaylyn, can you hear us yet? She's still connecting. So, hey, hi, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. So,
Hi.
I guess this is your first time to this group?
Yes.
Hi. And can you say anything about like what you were looking for or what you imagine this is?
Oh, my mom sent me a link to join.
Oh, you're Michelle's daughter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So good. Yeah. So you have a little background then I assume that she gave you. So I just wanted to make
Yes.
sure we weren't in the middle of this and leaving you behind. So
Okay.
we're kind of in the middle of reading the lecture and just commenting, and feel free to, make your own comments or ask some questions if you want. He's talking about self-esteem and how for most of us we really have uh, a place where we don't respect and like ourselves, and that creates a lot of our difficulties.
Okay.
And then so we're reading now how kind of that arises out of this kind of confusion and dualistic perception. And so we're torn between inner dissension and painful confusion. In this case, the dilemma is, how can you accept and like yourself without falling into the danger of self-indulgence and self-justification for destructive traits that exist in all human beings, no matter how concealed they may be? Or on the other side, how can you confront, accept, and admit these negative destructive traits, weaknesses, little selfishnesses, cruelties, and vanities that often make you vindictive and unloving, and yet still maintain your self-respect? How can you avoid falling into the danger of destructive guilt, self-rejection, and self-contempt. This is a deep-rooted conflict in most human beings, whether or not they know it, battle with it. It is a typical dualistic confusion that apparently makes admitting an unpleasant truth and self-acceptance into mutually exclusive opposites. So I think that kind of encapsulates a bit of it, right? And that, like for some reason, whenever we have to face and take responsibility maybe for a negative attitude or a, self-destructive or other destructive place, seeing, maybe, excuse me, I got to sneeze, excuse me, seeing where, we might not have our heart open, where we, might feel angry and negative and whatever. So, when we feel like that, we feel like it's appropriate. We should judge ourselves. We should reject ourselves, and so we're kind of split because one part of us is doing that and we don't really know how to stop it. And another part of us is then seeing that and judging it and condemning it. And there's a kind of cross that we get hung on in that. And so part of this pathwork, really helps us learn to be, courageous and caring and facing sort of, our negative aspects, our lower self, our, dark places, without annihilating ourselves, without feeling ashamed about it, right? Without making it sort of the, kind of the measure of our own being. So those of you who have recently found this raging battle within yourselves will know exactly what I'm talking about. So is everybody here connecting, like, or are some people not even recognizing this? Because it happens, right? So I don't know if you want to raise a hand or something, if you're, nod or thumbs up or something if you're on the screen so I can see you.
I did want to say that Bridget had left a message in the chat. She says that she has tried to comment, but her microphone isn't working correctly on her computer. So I don't know if she wanted to write in a comment or ask a question if her speaker or her mic's not working correctly.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I've got the chat up now a little bit so I can see. So if you want, Bridget, go ahead and try to chat. I don't know, if there's any way I can help you address your mic. So that was probably the best way. You might also try, you can sometimes call in on the phone, but I don't think I sent out that phone directory list. So
she's going to probably try
she's gonna try again, come back in. All right.
So you're asking about what you read here or any of us, you're asking, is there any input that anyone has regarding the different things that were listed as far as for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, this whole lecture is on self-esteem, and the guide is basically saying that all of us basically hate and do not respect ourselves. So can you find a place inside of you that is true? And to varying degrees, we have this, so it may not be that you're aware of some raging anti-self part of you. It may be subtle. It may be kind of calm and above it all, and just kind of scold you for being who you are. But, it is.
I think too that it, what you may have experienced as a teenager or a young adult, and then you learn to work through those things or learn to have more self-love and self-care. I think that there could be varying degrees of it, that possibly as you're working through some of that, it becomes lesser, or maybe still trying to find tools. Maybe some of us are in the place, still trying to find tools to apply to that, or how to sit with, sitting with having the feelings of, as you're saying, self-hate or self-contempt.
Yeah. I think, we don't really recognize how self-destructive it is. Like in the beginning, he says, the angels weep when even one part of us rejects our own self. And again, this can be very, overt, but it can also be very subtle and very covert. And so most of us carry this, and then yes, like a lot of times, the healing journey is primarily about that, and there are ways where self-facing and doing the work helps you acknowledge and recognize, because what happens as you do the work, you begin to identify with that part of you, the part that cares and is doing the work, rather than the faults. And what he's saying in the very beginning of this is that because we mostly think or assume who we are is our faults, our imperfections. Yeah.
You see, you say he, but I thought it was a woman who.
Yeah, Eva is a woman, but she referred to, this is channeled material, right? And I mean, I think the guide basically said that, there were many beings involved in bringing this, but I think she experienced the main channel, the main spirit that was coming through her in the masculine, because she was the one that started the use of the term he, as far as I understand. Frank,
clarity. And I have clearly fixed my audio.
Good. Yes, we can hear you good. So yeah, so it, and I wish I could train myself to say the guide they, because I think that's ultimately more accurate. But
agree.
I'm just a person 100%. Of habits. So but yeah, so what's important here is less what it is, who it is, anything like that. The guide says, don't even worry about where this material comes from. He says, find out if it applies, find out if you can, see where this is inside of you and utilize it. It's a practical application of self-knowledge. And so,
thank you.
And so like, this one piece that we're looking at here is this knowledge within ourselves of how sometimes very self-rejecting, frustrated with ourselves. For instance, I think that's one that often, we just assume is natural. Something happens, it doesn't work out right. We kind of kick ourselves in the butt or punch ourselves in the arm or something, figure, and or maybe we really are raging inside about it, or maybe we feel really bad because it didn't work. And, so all of these things, like are ways that we turn our energy and either, make it our own fault or somebody else's fault, right? And then we're, angry or judgmental. And there's a way in which, again, the fundamental bond of love that we are seeking, it has to be founded in our own self-love. We really, we can think we love people, before we really care about ourselves. And I think in some ways we do. But if you can't love yourself unconditionally, then you can't really love other people unconditionally. And so there's a kind of way that, where we, go into defense, we go into contraction, we go into sort of the ego protection, when we're in a state of judgment and control and all of that. I was reading something today earlier around surrender and acceptance from Eckhart Tolle. And the Pathwork guide talks about this as well, and there's this way that, we need to learn to trust what is and stop resisting or fighting it, and most of the time, when we're resisting or fighting what is, some part of us wants to, blame somebody or something. And so, oftentimes we turn in that way. And again, sort of like this larger trust, this larger acceptance of like everything that life brings and the total unification, like that all experience is interconnected and interrelated and, happening just as it somehow needs to happen. We from our egoic place, we don't want it to be that way. We want to have the capacity to control it. We want to be able to change it. We want to, and, the serenity prayer is a beautiful prayer. It's not like, even Jesus said, if possible, take this cup from me, right? But at some level, we have to accept and surrender when that, becomes the only option. So, grant me the, wisdom to know the difference between the things I can change and the things that I can't, and give me the acceptance for the things that I can't change. And then the capacity to, act and change the things that I can. But it's a fine study. And whenever we get into a forcing current, whenever we get into, kind of our will, then we're not working with spirit, we're not listening. And when we stay surrendered and accepting and in the present moment with what is happening patiently, right, then it kind of transforms and moves into, what we were seeking in the first place. And we're, participating, but we're not forcing. And
Well,
so
I think that that's the practice though too. I don't mean to stop you where you're at.
That's
but
okay, yeah.
Before it goes even further, when you're saying that something is happening before us, it's unraveling before us and we can't control it. And you said that, it's perfect just the way that it is, or I mean, you said it's happening to us or around us or because of us, exactly as it should be. And that's the difficult part, is accepting that, because sometimes that can feel so uncomfortable in the body and very overwhelming. And like, just as you said, you can't control it. And right. The mind is racing, you don't have an answer. How do I fix this? How do I change this? But the practice being in, okay, things are unfolding just as they should. Though it may appear very negative or ugly or uncomfortable, or how much we don't want it to be this way, taking a breath and saying, okay, it is unfolding just as it can. I can't control any of it. But not delving into the self-hate.
Grace to.
Yeah, and not delving quickly into, I'm so stupid, why did I do that? Why did this happen? Or just immediately into the self-rejection. But then you digging further, you're saying, oh, there's some evidence of self-rejection here, some self-hate. And trying to figure out how to, I guess, get to the root of that.
Exactly. I think in one place in this lecture he says, like the trap is, something must be wrong here, right? And so like we automatically are in a defense, but the defense is a tightness, is an attempt to control, is a blocking, and so then that blocks the natural unfolding of the life force that is actually trying to carry us someplace. And that's how we get stuck, in it. And so, and again, like whenever we, like don't like the way it is, then, we find some fault with ourselves or something, or others or something like that. So that's a part of, resistance to, what is happening. And a lot of that resistance does get turned against our own very self, right? And then I don't know if you can feel, but, when you are, negative towards yourself, when you have a critical unhappiness or thought, or frustration with yourself, that there's a way that energetically that really impacts us. And we don't recognize, because we're mostly identified with the part that's angry at ourselves or, beating on ourselves or, wishing we could redo it and replaying it in our mind. But that whole thing, like if we shift and pay attention to, so there's one part of us upset with another part of us, right? So let's identify with the other part and see how the other part feels. How does this living center in you that you're blaming right now, this maybe, life force, child part, whatever, that you are, not happy with, how does that kind of relationship make it feel? How do you feel in that kind of relationship? So, where we're often anxious or shameful, or, having all of these difficult feelings that we can't seem to control, if we really look, most of them are coming from what I call our own inner terrorist. And that is this, idealized self-image, this part of us that wants it different than the way it is, and, has this forcing current, and, uses unhappiness, uses, the will and the frustration of the will as a way of making us feel bad. And we have a lot, oftentimes, of our life that is spent in that kind of distress, that kind of suffering. And the only way out of that particular suffering is for us to wake up out of it and recognize it and make informed and different choices. And again, it's a habit, so we have to keep recognizing it and making that choice over and over again.
Well said.
So let me go ahead and see, we'll continue with the lecture, because, sometimes I get in front of the guide and we're talking about things he's going to be talking about. So those of you, excuse me, who have recently found this raging battle within yourselves will know exactly what I'm talking about. Others who have not yet recognized their self-rejection will have to come to this awareness gradually. You can certainly sense shyness, uncertainty, insecurity, apprehension about being rejected or criticized, as well as feelings of inferiority and inadequacy. So, if you have any of those feelings, which most of us do at some point in time or other, that's evidence that that's, hiding underneath it. Perhaps you may perceive here or there a peculiar guilt feeling that makes no sense to you. Although the guilt usually hides behind other attitudes, it is rarely so remote that it cannot be clearly perceived at times once you set out to detect such things. Perhaps you are aware that you are not open to the untold possibilities of blissful fulfillment. So life has this, infinite possibilities of blissful fulfillment. And we make do with much less than we could experience, right? Well, it's feeling a little empty, a little less than, a little like we want more or whatever, it's perhaps you can discern that you stand back in life and feel vaguely undeserving, and in perceiving your own possibilities negatively, at least in certain areas of your life. So, people I work with oftentimes, this is, they're stuck in this place where they've got a story about their life, and, it failed, and their failures, and they just cannot see any way forward. This is very painful. But all of us have, again, some of that, I think, so.
Indeed.
So all these manifestations indicate self-rejection, self-dislike. It should not be too difficult to bridge the gap in consciousness between any of these manifestations with the more profound root, namely that you do not think much of yourself. Now, it's kind of like, in my own journey, I found that this would be a little bit sort of like, if my mind was reading this before I had found this place, I would think it's all about thinking, evaluating myself kind of in my mind or consciously or but I found in the discovery of this place that it's less about, clearly, like I'm either thinking I'm feeling against myself or I'm feeling with myself. I'm befriending myself, or I am attacking or withdrawing and denying myself, right? And so this befriending of ourselves is not really like so much about how I think of myself, although I think it has to be founded to some degree on, places where we have grown. The guide says the real adult need is to see our own growth, right? And to give love. And so the more that we can activate those two things, the more that we, can support that self-liking, from, our own sense of who we are and how we care, and, we feel good about that in ourselves. So that's important too. And yet, if we notice that we don't care, if we're closed down, if we're, in resistance or defense, oftentimes if we have that desire to be loving or good, that's where we then judge ourselves and reject ourselves and condemn ourselves, because that part of us, we can't, like our heart won't open to our demand that our heart opens, right?
Say that again.
Our heart won't open to a demand that the heart open. The guide says that love is a spontaneous soul movement, not a commandment. So we can't make ourselves love, but we know that that's what we want. And so then what we want to do is, kind of like look at, what is in the way, and love that which is blocking it, because, whatever that is needs love. It's somehow, in fear, it's in, distrust, it's in, withdrawal or contraction in some way. And so, it's like it may be even attacking or acting out in some way, but it still needs love.
Yeah.
And so, like when we notice even our negativities, our faults, our flaws, like this is a part of the challenge is that we have to see them without condemning them, without rejecting them. We have to recognize them and embrace them and know that, they're there for a purpose. They're there, unconsciously thinking that they're helping us, defending us, doing something, that we established in childhood that we needed, but we don't really. And so, we have to re-educate those parts. And we can't really be a good teacher, a re-educator of them, unless they trust us, unless they believe us, unless they feel our goodwill towards them.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of ourselves, we need to just really embrace and work with, almost like we were the therapist or the helper or the, again, the divine light, within us. It's kind of like giving ourselves a session from our higher self if we can. So he said, once you feel, however
I
big.
have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about our parts, are you talking about our personality parts?
Talking about any and all parts, I think. I mean, I think we are a bag of beings and they're all in play. And it's kind of like we're essentially like a schizophrenic person. And what we need to do is activate an integrating personality and identify with that and work with all of everything else within us, in a way of trying to unify or, harmonize. Does that answer the question? I guess I'm not quite sure where it's coming from.
Well, my feeling is, my personal feeling is that when I'm beating up on myself, I'm mostly beating up on my wounded child, for not being as perfect or as advanced or as progressed or as good as it could have been, made as much of its life as it could have made or something like that. And this may sound ridiculous, but I play golf, and every shot is an opportunity to be kind to yourself, because trust me, it's a very difficult sport. And I really beat myself up hard when I'm playing bad. And so much to the point where it's like when I come off the course and I'm like, I never want to do that again. What am I doing out here? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I don't
Which
come
is a
away
good
from this.
question, but not about golf. It's more about why are you beating yourself up for
Yeah, why am I beating
not
myself
playing very well?
up? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because golf is the catalyst for the action of beating myself up. And
you might look underneath that, again, there's it's deeper, right? And maybe like you're saying, it's, the part of you that's, like attacking your wounded child.
Yeah.
But I think there's more even to really recognize, because that's what he's saying here. Once we feel vaguely that we don't respect ourselves, then we really need, the next step must be to make this attitude more specific. So you've got a very specific example, right? And the more that you can drill down into observing this voice in you that wants to beat you up instead of identifying with it, right? Really being curious about it. Who are you? Why are you doing this? Like, what are you getting out of it? What are you thinking you're doing? Are you protecting me? What is the outcome that you're seeking by, treating me this way? And you can challenge and ask it these questions and seek to understand it.
How perfect are you how unrealistically perfect are you expecting yourself to be?
In many ways, yeah. But it's more than that, like, why are you expecting yourself to be perfect? What is it that drives that, right? What death are you going to die if you're not perfect? And if you're not really dying any death, you're just doing it out of habit. What is that habit about, and what is that supposed to accomplish, right? And then paying attention to how it actually feels. Like you said, you get off the course and you don't even want to go back and play again. So,
But you do.
Absolutely. Do all the time. Go back all over and over again.
So it's a beautiful example, and I think, those kinds of specifics are really useful in our self-work to, because, sometimes it's so complex and confusing, but here it is, like, just a really clear, dynamic. And so you should be able to, like, get a lot of understanding, self-knowledge, by really seeking to feel more into both parts of that dualistic dynamic and kind of awaken the higher self, right, to hold both of them, right, guide both of them. The wounded child needs the higher self to tell that it's not really your fault, you're fine, don't worry about it. The critic, needs the higher self to, say, chill, it's okay. Why are you so scared, right? What are you worried about? What has got you so head up? And so calming and grounding, into, presence and holding, like this presence of the higher self is the space of presence and holding that we need, that we didn't have as children, that created the wounding in the first place. So now we come back and we do it within our own beings. And by now we're the only ones that really can, because, like, it's kind of like ducklings, after childhood, we may still seek our parents or seek our mates or somebody else to, remedy what we didn't get in childhood. But, most of the time it's us that has to bring that.
Well, I just have to wonder, though, when we get into that habit of self-deprecation, if we're just not beating up on our imperfect wounded child.
But why? Why would you do that? We're not stupid. You're doing it for a purpose. You got to understand what that reason is. And that intention, that motivation comes from that part of you that's doing it. So you have to inhabit that energy. I want to kill myself, and feel into why it does.
No. Well, I need to ponder that a little bit more.
Yeah. It's like if we're like kind of aware of certain levels, but we're kind of like, we haven't gone to the clearing of it, it means we haven't gotten all the way in deep enough yet. And so oftentimes, we feel like we recognize what's going on, but then we don't know how to transform it. So, and usually what that means is we just have to be more conscious and present to it and learn more from it. What's really happening here. And again, that means that we have to kind of pull back out of the drama between the inner splits and activate our own higher self, right?
Yeah.
The observer, the witness, the curious one, instead of the one that's battling one side or the other of that split. We become that third presence that can, just wonder what's going on here.
It feels like you're pouring salt in a primal wound.
Okay, yeah, good. Yeah. And I
what it
think that's,
is.
but why? Can you ask that? Can you
Yeah,
feel, keep keeping?
Why? Why keep pouring salt in a primal wound? Why would you keep doing that to yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's a reason. There is, it's like, and sometimes it takes a little while, and it's not always just, some kind of logical thing, there's an emotional logic of its own, right? But it does believe that that's necessary somehow. And you have to recognize how it believes that so that you can guide it out of that bad reality. That's not actual reality. That's a image.
Mhm.
Does anyone else on the call feel that way? I'm
Which
curious
way?
that when you're beating up on yourself, that you're pouring salt into a primal wound.
I think that's a great description.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean,
I feel
it's kind of supposing really in a way that we are have allowed ourselves to feel the child's place. And oftentimes in the beginning with Pathwork, we're struggling and feeling it in some way, but we're not really like recognizing it and feeling it in that same way. So I don't know, Jalen, you may very well, and it may recognize, but it's okay, if you don't completely recognize it. And it's just a matter of like when you feel your own self-judgment to shift, because we're usually identified with the self-judger, so we can shift identification from that part of our consciousness and feel the part of our consciousness that is the recipient of that energy. And that's when we kind of feel like, oh, this is an old wound and you're just pouring salt on it, kind of thing. But again, even in that, like the guide is saying that we're, maybe we're trying to actually feel like the original trauma, and so we keep pouring salt on the wound, and it's not useful and productive, but it is somehow a way that we can't let it go. And in that not being able to let it go, we're eventually, going to get to the core of it, right? So it kind of keeps it recycling, and it sometimes feels like endlessly recycling. But in that is the hope that we will wake up out of it. And so even that has a brilliance, in the overall soul journey. Yeah, you're going to just loop in and struggle with this until you wake up out of it, right? It's like, it's your free will, you have to recognize what you're doing in order to make a different choice.
I was going to say that, maybe that it comes in stages, because like, for me, when I look at what it seems to be the repeating primal wound for me would be rejection. And I don't even think I knew, maybe in my 40s, possibly, I started to even understand that there was some kind of connection with rejection. I think ways that I lashed out or spoke or rejected because I didn't have that information. Somehow it wasn't revealed to me, or maybe I wasn't listening, or maybe I didn't have the tools. The kind of word speak that we're all using now is not something that was common when I was coming up, or even in church. They would say, if you're feeling that rejection, that's what the devil brings upon you. You've got to reject that. That's not the way that God sees you. So people are telling you these things, but nobody's ever teaching you to go inward and sit with what does that primordial rejection feel like?
Right.
And begin to recognize that. And then maybe when you're saying becoming the observer, well, I never even learned to be about being an observer until maybe 5 years ago. Now I can see it and observe, oh, that's rejection that's happening right now. I know what that feeling is. Okay, so maybe there's steps, maybe there's rungs on this ladder that I'm learning. And now, oh, I'm starting to observe when rejection's happening. I'm starting to know what it feels like when I'm having it. So, okay, what do I do now? So maybe that's part of the next question. Oh, rejection,
Right.
you're back. Oh, you're here again. Here you are. Okay, what lesson, what's the next stage that we're going to learn of going up this ladder together? And for whatever reason, it seems to be a pattern that's in my life, and learning to, you're here to teach me something, but as you said before, instead of me being angry with the rejection or angry in my response, like I'm playing golf and I've just done a really, hit the ball and it's oh man, I hit it all the way to the left again, and it cleared, it's in the trees. How many times have I done that? Why do you keep doing that, Michelle? Why is your golf game so horrible? I'm just imagining this. If I'm actually a driver of carts, so I don't actually play. So I'm just imagining to myself, if I was speaking that way and then being so hard on myself, then I'd have to say, oh, is there some part of me that wants to be an amazing player? Well, why do I want to be this great golfer that's enjoying golf? Why am I on this path to enjoy golf? Why do I even want that? I don't know.
And how do I enjoy it when I'm like
questions.
insisting on, the only way I can enjoy it is have a perfect, score or a win.
Because to me,
So
even in that
it takes-
conversation, when you're saying that, this dialogue that has to take place between me and this feeling.
Right. And it's the way that the feel, like we can see what life wants is for us to enjoy. It's a game, right?
Well,
so
the thing about
what
the
part
golf
of us?
analogy that
Say again?
the thing about the golf analogy that bothers me is that it's solo, and we're not solo in this effort to heal the earth.
Yeah, but this is something that until we do our inner work, we don't got a choice of doing anything with the earth. We need the earth to heal us before we can heal the earth. So, and there is a way in which, it's the inner work, but we do it in the Pathwork in groups because we're learning the law of brotherhood, and we're learning how to, be with each other. Once we can also love ourselves, then we can learn to accept others, even though we don't agree or like them, or, they have certain traits that, are in their defense and triggers our defense and all of that. So, it does go into, how do we get along with each other, which is, I think, also an important part of this. And it also talks about affirming the life force. Even in this lecture, he talks about the reality of nature. And so as we go into the lecture a little further, I think you'll see, but so this is the work that
and footnote, I grew up playing golf. I was junior state champion, Virginia.
Okay, so you worked at it to create some perfection. Were you really frustrated with yourself when you didn't quite measure up?
My father would have been very disappointed.
Yeah. And so, and that's okay. That's a part of it, is if we can learn to feel grief or loss or disappointment instead of rage and rejection, it actually helps. The guide is saying, like that we go into the, aggressive defense because we think it feels better than to feel the hurt, right? The disappointment, the loss, and so if we can actually just sit with that in our bodies, and again, I don't mean go into the story and say, oh, woe is me, I played a crappy game, but to go in and just feel in our bodies where the place of loss or disappointment or whatever is, and turn it into a sensation that, we can just, again, be present with and breathe through. And actually, it'll often drop us into a little grieving and release, and then we're fine. Or, various things can happen along the lines of, again, connecting with our instinctual self and allowing, this is what the guide goes into in this lecture as well, and allowing, a much more basic healing that can happen when we are not trying to control it, sort of use our our defenses to keep us safe, but actually just be present to what is again, and allow the experience to kind of wash over us. And maybe that starts out with the anger, but if we don't identify and kind of jump on the bandwagon and go with, but we just, oh, look at this. This is a feeling of, aggression in me. I'm unhappy. Maybe we take a tennis racket and a pillow and we, like discharge that energy. But at that point, you may be thinking a little bit about what it's about, but it's better if you can let go and just be in the movement and the energy of the aggression and feeling it in your body, because then it doesn't get all tangled up in a story and it can move through us.
Mm. Well said.
So let's continue on. We got a little bit more on this lecture to go, and there's a lot of good stuff here, but this is a great discussion. Thanks, everybody. So
Thank you.
let's see. So again, we have to be, once we get this, that, we have some kind of lack of self-esteem or self-rejection, then we need to make this attitude more specific. And if you really want to find it, you will do so. Although the recognition of exactly what this attitude is may come quite indirectly. This is the way the path often works. On the other hand, you may see something quite clearly in yourself that is truly regrettable and undesirable. Then you may fall into the erroneous attitude of defiance and self-justification, because you believe that admitting your undesirable traits means that you must dislike and reject your entire self. You fail
Shame.
to go ahead.
Shame.
Yeah, shame, right. So you fail to differentiate between rejecting a trait and rejecting the person, which is exactly the definition of shame. Shame says, I am bad. Rejecting the trait says, oh, I acted in a way that I don't agree with somehow. So, whether yourself or others, we're rejecting the person rather than the trait. Therefore, you fall into the error of justifying, denying, falsifying, and rationalizing, and often even beautifying a very undesirable and destructive trait. So I don't know if anybody has been in that position of defending their worst self. I have.
I've
Fight to the
witnessed
death. But it is like, we can't, the outer condemnation is even worse than the self-condemnation in some ways. Now, the truth is the self-condemnation is the foundation. And if we clear that, nobody outside of us can make us feel that condemnation. So it really is centered around that self-condemnation, but we would rather self-condemn ourselves than have it come from outside of ourselves where we can't control it, where, it's coming at us from others. That, is like we actually defend against that kind of pain and shame by giving it to ourselves in the belief that, somehow if we, beat ourselves up, that, somehow the other person won't do that to us.
Oof.
So we fail to differentiate. Okay, we read that. So what brings self-respect? Here is how to find the key that will enable you to squarely confront the undesirable attitudes without in the least losing respect for yourself or losing the sense that you are a valuable human being. First, you have to perceive and experience life in a new way. Your life, and you are life because you are alive, represents all life, all nature. One of the earmarks of life is its untold potential for change and expansion. To be more specific, once you perceive life as it is, you will sense that even the lowliest of all destructive creatures has every possibility for change and for goodness, for greatness and for growth. At any moment, the thinking may change and create new attitudes and behavior, new feelings, new ways of being. And if these do not happen now, that alters nothing. For one day, things are bound to change. And then your true nature must finally emerge. So all of what we're dealing with is not even our true nature. It's just a bunch of layers of confusion and conflict and cover up. And so part of what we're trying to do is, get to that true nature and activate it and bring it into the world. So the knowledge of one's true nature having to emerge sooner or later changes everything. So can you feel that? Does that feel true to you? Like it's a little subtle, but I think it's got something there. If you really get that, every fault, every flaw, every bad habit, every problem that you have, sooner or later is going to change. And not only just change, but change for the better, grow, evolve, mature. When we can feel the truth of that, it changes our despair about yourself, about others, about life, right? It opens the door to knowing your potential for goodness, regardless of how malicious you may now be, for generosity, regardless of how mean you may now be, for loving, regardless of how selfish you may now be, for strength and integrity, regardless of how weak you may now be, and how tempted to betray your best self, for greatness, regardless of how petty you may be. So, like we're already that, right? It's just that it's covered over, and these things that it's covered over by, the soul actually chose to bring in service to the light, to, take on, like, we are the light. And as, we take our light and use it in service of transforming and healing the pain bodies, the darkness, the other parts, then, that really is a part of why we're here. We came in to bring our gifts, to, bring something to life, our love, our caring. And we also came in to care for life by transforming darkness within us. And so, whatever we're carrying, we don't have to judge. We don't have to be ashamed of. We don't have to blame ourselves. It's like, that's my assignment. I took it on. It's like, it's a difficult one, or it's like, sorry, I, don't want to hurt anybody with it, but sometimes it does, but we can be forgiven. We can forgive others. It's like, it's part of what we came here to do. And so we can relax into life in a way that, like, we're so tense in our perfectionism and in our control and in our trying to, be safe and all of this, we can't enjoy life. So look at nature, at any manifestation of life, and it is forever changing. It is forever dying and being reborn. So it's the medicine wheel, right? And so that's a part of what we also are surrendering to, is sometimes we're in the West and the North, and we're, ending things instead of new beginnings and pleasure and all of that. But it's all good. All of it is part of the cycle, and it's forever expanding and contracting and pulsating. It is always moving and branching out. This applies particularly to life that is conscious, and even more so to life that is self-conscious. The power of thought, of will, of emotions is infinitely greater than any inanimate power. And yet the inanimate power of, say, electricity, and even more of atomic energy, is so great that you have barely begun. Oops, here comes Lori. And yet the inanimate power of, say, electricity, hey, Lori, and even more of atomic energy is so great that you have barely begun to gain an inkling of its possibilities, both for good and constructive as well as destructive ends. Hey, Lori, welcome. So, using the power of conscious mind. Now, if in the smallest atom, so small that it cannot even be perceived with the naked eye, a power exists to release untold energies for building or destroying, how infinitely more is this the case with the power of the mind, the power of thinking, feeling, and willing. Just dwell on this significant fact, my friends, and it will open new vistas to you. Why do you blindly assume that the power of inanimate things is greater than the power of the mind? The powers to think, will, feel, express, act, and decide are the earmarks of consciousness. They are vastly underrated by humanity. Living consciousness, therefore, deserves a respect that can hardly be put into words. So even if that consciousness is completely fucked up and completely in distortion and in, lostness or whatever, it is still living consciousness and therefore deserves a respect that can hardly be put into words. It does not matter how it manifests. No matter how undesirable and destructive the present manifestation may be, the life that issues from the momentary destructiveness holds all the potential for turning into constructive channels, for life's source is truly inexhaustible. Since the very essence of life is movement and therefore change, this is what justifiably and realistically gives hope, no matter how hopeless a situation or a state of mind may appear. People in deep depression and hopelessness must be in error, for they negate the very essence of life. And those who despair about themselves because they feel they are bad, so unacceptable, so destructive, so negative, find themselves in the error of perceiving and experiencing life in a fixed way, as though what is now must always be. This is the error of deadness. This is so, and that is all there is to it. Such thinking ignores and negates the flux of true life. Since you are alive, this fluidity is yours. In reality, you are fluid. Can you feel that? Can you imagine that? Like, we have our habits, we have all of our conditioning, we have our programs that we're always running. And yet, I don't know, in my 73 years, I've changed a lot. I'm different, right, over time. And also that I can feel, like, a kind of fluidity that gets more and more where, I'm conscious of what's not working. And so it's like, okay, so what else can I do? And it's possible for me to, move in a fluid way into a whole other, way of relating with something. And when we're kind of like living through our images and our constructs, that's difficult to do. But the reality is we are fluid. The only thing that keeps you from being fluid and therefore changing into a state of realistic hopefulness and light, into the essence of life itself, is your own enclosure, your ignorance of this truth, your momentary state of consciousness. And we all, like we were talking about this earlier, like, yeah, it's a ladder or a process or to me, it feels like, we're born in deep in consciousness. And it's almost like, we're continuing to incarnate more and more of our spirit as we go in life. And so as we incarnate more of our spirit, we gain more consciousness, more awareness. And, that, is like helps us in this fluidity in this process of change. And there's this, awareness of sort of expansion that's always possible. So the state of consciousness, go ahead.
No, I was agreeing.
Okay. So the state of consciousness is now fixed in the conviction that life and your personality traits are static and must remain that way. And sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes we've been lost in certain dynamics and places, for a long time. But even that is like sometimes means that you're just getting really close to finding your way beyond it. Your state of consciousness remains fixed in this dark imprisonment as long as you know nothing else. You have the possibility of applying these words to your personal situation. Where are you hopeless? Why are you hopeless? Do you feel hopeless because of life itself? Because you believe the possibilities for expansion and happiness are too limited to give you sufficient scope? Are you hopeless because you feel you do not deserve and cannot have a more meaningful, fulfilled experience of life? The latter thought may smolder secretly beneath your perception of life's limitations. If you can bring these fleeting impressions into more concise awareness, you can ask yourself, am I hopeless about deserving happiness because I possibly, quite justifiably, dislike certain traits in me? But don't you then also believe that these traits mark and define your person? That is the great struggle, my friends. You erroneously believe that what is most obnoxious to you is you. This, at the same time, is for the great resistance inherent in all human beings against changing. So when we think, we are that which is, we don't like, right? And then we get really stuck, because to change means to change our very being, and that can't be possible because we are so identified with the negative, right? It means like, well, if I change that, I die, right? We're identified with a certain way of how we are. And so the change itself feels like a kind of death, even though we long for something else.
Mm.
So at the same time, this is the cause for the great resistance inherent in human beings against changing. For since you do not believe that you can essentially be anything else, but that which you dislike, you have to hold on to it because you do not wish to cease existing. That is the crux of this dualistic confusion. This is why so inexplicably hold on to destructive traits. Does that make sense? Like we really feel like, if we've identified with them, to let them go or to change them, is, the loss of self again. And then he also mentions, like these limitations of life. And I think there is something in that, like we came here to incarnate in certain limiting conditions. It's part of the puzzle on the blackboard, right? So sometimes I think we get a little confused and off when we hear all of this manifestation stuff, and just, like some of that the guide is saying, consciousness is very powerful, can change everything. But it's a little more subtle than I think most manifestation teachings. So, we have to, not just assume that, the limitation is our fault, because if we could only think differently, we wouldn't have it, right? What we need to do is recognize and again, accept there's limitation here on this earth. It's part of the journey. And we kind of selected certain capacities and certain strengths and certain limitations. And it's the working through and the creative utilization of our capacities and strengths as we work with the limitations that actually, makes us feel more fulfilled, in our journey. You hold on because you genuinely believe, that the negative or the, limitation is you. You are in a fixed state, and any change is impossible because you do not realize that all possibilities exist in you. You are already what you think you would have to produce artificially, laboriously, and through forcefully contorting your very natures. I think a key here too, because the ego thinks that we have to do it, right? And somehow we have to figure it out, and and that triggers the ISI and all kinds of stuff. So, what he's saying here is that this is already within us. It already exists. What we're doing is removing and uncovering the things that block it from its true natural expression. So it's not anything we have to do, it's what we undo that kind of is the key. Since you will not believe this, you cannot give up holding on to the very facets you so dislike, for they seem to represent your essence. This is indeed a vicious circle, for true self-esteem can, of course, come only by your sensing your capacity to love, to give of yourself. Yet this capacity cannot be known when you take it for granted that it simply does not exist, when you believe that any state other than the one you express now is alien to you, intrinsically alien. Your real final fixed state is what you dislike. As long as that is the case, you remain trapped in a vicious circle. In order to come out of this circle paradoxical, life must be understood in its essence. No matter how fixed your life may appear, it is only one tiny part of the whole story, my friends. Underneath all these personality traits you believe are fixed, final things, the fluid life exists like a winter stream under the snow. It is constant. Feelings branch out of it in all directions, spontaneously and wondrously, forever self-renewing. Its life pulsates vibrantly. It is movement itself. Above all, it is a life in which you are free at any moment to think new and different thoughts that create new and different life expressions and personality. You see, as long as you ignore the true state of life, hence your own true state, you cannot give yourself the fundamental respect that you deserve as a human creature. So this goes back to the beginning of the lecture where he's talking about how, we often hate and disrespect ourselves, right? And again, it is a kind of vicious circle because like when we do ignore the true state of our own being, right, then it's hard, when we just see ourselves as our faults, our flaws, our imperfections, our stuckness, our, the things we don't like. So when we can't give ourselves this fundamental, respect, then, we're in another very, painful, vicious circle of self-rejection. And we can't possibly do the, grab onto life, have these new creative possibilities, these new things when we're in a spiral of self-rejection. You see, as long as you ignore the true state of life, hence your own true state, you cannot give yourself the fundamental respect you deserve as a human creature. As long as you confuse life with death, with inanimate matter, you will despair. And even inanimate matter, as you now know from present, oops, now I skipped something. Where was I? Somehow I skipped 2 pages or more. I can't figure out. Oh, here it is, I think. No, this is further back.
Right there. That's
Yeah.
it, I think.
Yeah, I think.
Innate.
Yeah.
But as you long from present at the very bottom, then you're going to the next one.
Okay, right.
What?
Yeah. And even inanimate matter, as you now know from present day science, has an intrinsic life and incredible movement. Once this life is released. Think about this, my friends. Even an apparently dead object is not dead. It contains life, movement, and utter change. Think of movement, life, and change in every atom of the deadest seeming matter. So nothing in the universe actually exists that is lifeless. How much less so with your consciousness? Your thinking is a constant movement. The only trouble is you have conditioned yourself to let it ruminate in habitual negative self-rejection and needless limitation. But once you decide to use your thinking in a new way, you will experience the truth of life's hopeful changeability, its endless possibilities to move in new directions. You can constantly expand your thinking, take in new ideas, embrace new realizations, and therefore bring to yourself new will directions, new expansions, new aims, new energies, new feelings. All of this is personality change. Without your being quite aware of it, these new ways of thinking and feeling change those attitudes you now dislike so much. So instead of like focusing on the attitudes and fighting with them, right? We can focus on the positive, the movement, the, like this exploration and self-knowledge. And that, like helps us move. When I talk about new ways of being, I want to make it quite clear that this does not mean that they have not existed in you as a dormant essence. They are only new as far as your awareness is concerned, for they are all there, constantly ready to be used for the asking. But as long as you close yourself within the narrow framework of your limited perceptions of yourself and of life, you cannot use what is already there. Perceive yourself as fertile soil, before the seeds are planted. Fertile soil contains incredible power to bring about new expressions of life. The potential seed in it, whether or not the seeds are actually put in. Your entire consciousness and aliveness are the most fertile soil imaginable. The fertile soil is constantly there with incredible power to bring forth new expressions of life in your thinking, your feeling, your willing, your energies, your possibilities of action and reaction. Each situation you are in contains new possibilities for reaction. You have choices all the time. You can be in a new situation and automatically fall into old conditioned reflexes, your negative approach, without paying attention to what you are doing. Perhaps you moan about the misery of life because this or that happened to you that you do not like, and you never see the connection between your discontent and failures on the one hand and your one-sided negative automatic reactions on the other. As long as you assume that this habitual approach is the only one possible, you will not grasp the possibilities and powers in your life. And I want to agree with this. And I also want to just kind of say that, there is a real condition of depression, of, this kind of thing that, just, saying buck up or think differently, is really, there's a deeper process here. And so I think that the fundamental essence of this is true, and that when we have access to our free choice, then we can activate it and use it. But there are things that have been co-opted, by negative specialists in the, dark realms, by, certain things that we are like, really in a kind of spiritual battle with. And so, it's not like I want you to hear this of, like you can do this, just snap your fingers and do it, right? It's more like you can do this, but it may take a journey. It may, be, a deep process of, kind of excavating and going into, all of this confusion and sorting it out and gaining the self-knowledge that we need, that, is not just the theory, but the direct application in our own being. So, one of the things, I had a lot of impatience and a lot of self-judgment and a lot of, self-hatred. I was really like the prize in that one, for many, many years in this work. And, it wasn't that, it was like over time, it loosens, it gradually kind of changes and transforms. And each time it does, more life, more, goodness comes in. And each time, we can challenge or we can look deeper or whatever, it brings, more light into these places that are difficult and dark. But, it's like, again, somehow that is the journey for us. And so many times I've looked back on the hardest parts in my life and I think, no, from here, when I was in them, I definitely didn't like them and would have changed them for all kinds of things. But from here, I see, how without them, I wouldn't be where I was, where I am, And so I begin to, understand that even, the problems, the negativities, the difficulties, the suffering, and the, situations that seemed like life just visited on me that, were not what I wanted at all. We're all in divine order in some ways. And so it takes a while to learn that. It takes a lifetime to learn that and to establish the faith in the unfolding of one's life. And of course, if something comes up in the moment, that's not in my plans, I'm going to go, ah! But there's a way in which now, I recognize I'm going, ah! And then I kind of like work with myself to ground and to calm and to access the faith that I have established in my being and kind of wait, because most of our defenses, they don't like to be, like just waiting. They want to act and fix it and do something. And so one of the most powerful places that I found, when things are happening, is to wait and let it unfold, get some clarity, like see where life is going to bring it before I get in there and meddle with it and create my own chaos. So like often the unfolding is happening, and if I can just set back and be with it and see if there's something I'm supposed to do to support it, or work with my own difficulties with it, but trusting that it's here, it has a message, it has a teaching, and then I can reestablish that kind of movement that goes into, through, and out the other side. Whereas if I resist, if I try to fix it, if I go into the defense, now I'm stuck and tangled up and the movement can't happen. So that's when you feel unhappy or hopeless. Question yourself, do I have another way to react to this situation that seems to befall me out of nowhere, and to which I choose to react negatively, destructively, making myself hopeless, complaining and feeling angry about it? This choice is yours. Your anger and complaints against the world are wasted, for all that energy could do much to build new life for you if it were used properly. You cannot change others, but you can certainly change your own attitudes and your thinking. Then life offers its limitless possibilities to you. First, your thinking and your attitudes change, then the feelings follow suit. Then your actions and reactions begin to respond to new, spontaneous impulses. And these in turn bring forth new life experiences. And the more you experience the chain reaction of this process, the more you also perceive that you are a living, moving, endlessly changing unit of life expression. And no trait merits evaluating and rejecting your whole self because of it. Once you perceive this, you can afford the wonderful, relieving luxury of calmly admitting any undesirable, ugly trait without in the least disliking yourself for it, without in the least losing your sense of being a divine expression, no matter what the trait may be. Then and only then can you really transform these traits. So this is a very powerful paragraph here. Does people following that? Any comments or, like?
Perhaps you should read it again.
Okay. So he says, the more you experience the chain reaction of this process, the more you perceive that you are a living, moving, endlessly changing unit of expression. And no trait merits evaluating and rejecting your whole self because of it. And again, we probably don't think that we do that. But then if we look at sometimes when we're lost in our pain body places, that's what's happening. We're rejecting our whole self because of some, part of ourself that we don't like. Once you perceive this, you can afford the wonderful, relieving luxury of calmly admitting any undesirable, ugly trait without in the least disliking it, liking yourself for it, without in the least losing your sense of being a divine expression, no matter what the traits may be. Then and only then can you really transform these traits. I would say another way of talking about what he's saying here is finding true humility. And the ISI, is the pride, shame kind of duality, right? That traps us into, being great or being terrible. And the real reality, is this kind of place that collapses that into just, our divine humility. I'm a child of God and I'm a complete mess, right? That's the reality. And if we can embrace that and not, like really know the value that we have, know our worth. We are a divine manifestation of light and consciousness, and we are beloved by God in ways that we cannot even fathom. And that doesn't mean that, we always get everything we want, but it is that we always get what we need at some level. And there is something in the, effect of what we're experiencing that when we can accept it, surrender to it, and just humbly, be with whatever, is not working, without turning against ourselves, then we can move through in a healthy way. And, that's what we came here to do, was transform that very thing and move forward. So paradoxical as this may seem, the total self-rejection, the destructive kind of guilt under discussion, is incapable of overcoming anything. Oops. You will not understand why, my friends, unless you see that it is impossible to overcome anything when you believe you are a fixed, unchangeable blob. You have heard that according to your belief, you must experience. But when you have built a false belief system, you cannot see beyond it. Your actions then are determined by your beliefs and must thus provide proof of their veracity, no matter how mistaken those beliefs are and how many other alternatives exist in reality. So does that make sense? Like we see what we believe, right? And there is this kind of aspect of projection in our consciousness that is often, at work for us. And so in a way, it's a big challenge, but we have to question what we see out there as ultimate fact and reality, because, a lot of it is, coming through our images, and we're interpreting, our story is interpreting the experience through a certain lens. So if you are convinced that you cannot change, you cannot even take a meaningful step in the direction of change. Therefore, you cannot experience change and must be convinced that change is impossible. The negative conviction makes it also impossible to summon the necessary effort, right? Why? Of course, you're helpless, right? Nobody is motivated. You can't possibly feel any desire to even begin. And so the energy, the discipline, the stamina, the initiative essential for effecting a change will be comparatively easy to muster when you know a change is possible. When you know that change merely means bringing out your dormant qualities. When you know that no matter how ugly the traits may be, you will not despair about being unlovable. You will make available the powers in you to surge forward. You will be able to dip into the resources of your innermost being that enable you to overcome any ugly, destructive trait. The power that created the universe with everything in it, including all that you are, possesses the strength to change anything. For even the things that should be changed were created by that same power, and must in essence be something other than they appear now. This power is also you, and is manifest once you contact it deliberately. This can be done only when you know of the source within you, which is forever changing, moving, and expanding with infinite possibilities. So sometimes it's hard. I remember early on, like this source and the higher self and what is all of that, getting in touch with it was difficult. But somehow what, I like in this lecture where he talks about it as the life force, and can we, just go inside and feel the direct experience of the life within us, right? There's a kind of experience of living, of being alive that, is not the events that we're experiencing, but, the presence and the energy and the isness of living. And so when we can, recognize that within us is actually the same as all life, as the divine life, as, God, then that can help us as well, because then we can begin to contact a sense of this source within us, and we can develop and expand on that. And part of that requires this next section where he's talking about reconnection with the instinctual life. You see, my friends, the life that is inherent in nature is also in you. Bare will and intellect are sterile, as you well know. Only the feeling of life, the natural life, can indeed bring you the fulfillment without which life is a sorry affair indeed. This is what we have been talking about and aiming for on this path. Now, why has humanity lost touch with the source of its own life, the source of its feelings, the source of its instincts, the source of its own nature deep inside the self? Only because you are so terrified of your destructiveness and do not know how to handle it. So civilization has for millennia denied the instinctual life, like because we're afraid if we let it go, it's going to get even more destructive. So we've tried to contain it, to control it, to deny it in order to preserve itself from dangers. But by doing so, humanity has cut off its connection with the essence of life itself. So we become our masked selves. We become who we think we should be self, right? And none of that is our real self, our instinctual living alive force. And maybe our instinctual living alive force is rage at the way the world is right now, and that's okay as long as we don't completely identify with that. We need to be in that instinctual movement and let that rage move and hear ourselves and know what we're upset about. And from that, we can observe, and new things and new understandings can come in. But if we deny it, if we suppress it, if we, block it in some way, then we really can't enter into, our fullness of ourself, of our real life. So I'm going to back up. If it had not realized that there are ways to eliminate the distorted, perverted natural forces, ways that need not deny life itself. The instinctual life has always been wrongly equated with destructiveness. And that goes way back, to Catholic churches and all kinds of, all those, anything that is natural to the human being had to be denied, suppressed, and controlled, especially during certain parts of our history. Only as humanity matures is it capable of learning that the instinctual life does not need to be denied in order to avoid evil. Indeed, it should not be denied, for doing so defeats life every bit as much as the feared evil itself. Only within the deep core of the instincts can God be found, because only there can true aliveness be found. Thus, humanity must find another means to handle its destructive instincts, if it is not to annihilate itself by different but just as fatal ways as giving vent to those negative instincts. So in some ways, we get caught, and we're, oh, I have this negative instinct, and and that's where I'm stuck, and I can't give vent to that because I'll identify with it, or it'll take me over, or I'll do something more destructive. But by holding back against it, it needs a container, and it needs not to be identified with, but it needs to be expressed. And then we can really truly know ourselves, and we can, transform that, because where there is some destructiveness, it's not innate. And if we allow the movement, it will clear itself, just like the river, when it's dammed, is stagnant and creates all kinds of problems. But when it's flowing, it naturally cleans itself. So this lecture will give you an additional tool to meet your destructive side. You will learn to value and nurture the deep instincts you have always so distrusted, and to find the truth of the living creative spirit in and through them. You will then joyfully further your instinctual life, unfold and integrate it. You will believe and trust in it. Do not deny and fear it, because you still have difficulties accepting and meeting your undesirable destructive traits. If you truly look at them in a dispassionate, objective way, you will always find that fear and denial really oppose the life of the instincts. The instincts are simple and innocent in themselves. Your destructiveness is always a result of pride, self-will, fear, vanity, greed, separateness, lovelessness, and one-upmanship. So those are a lot of the lower self, things. And, it's true. That's what, and we need to recognize those in us, but we also need to recognize that all of those are simply ways that we are trying to survive and get our needs met. And we don't understand that that way of doing it will never get us what we want. So again, We don't even want to judge our own pride, self-will, fear, vanity, greed, separateness, lovelessness, one-upmanship. We want to be objective and understanding of it. We want to, find a way to, meet it and allow it to be transformed. In this way, you will find it more and more possible to meet, acknowledge, admit, and accept anything in you, no matter how ugly, and never lose for 1 second the sense of your intrinsic beautiful aliveness and of deserving your own esteem. This inner state will be the springboard from which change becomes possible. We can't change unless we can be in this place of self-acceptance of all of ourself, right? The inner state will be the springboard from which change becomes possible. It will not only be a possibility in the abstract, but an effective way of living day in and day out, a constantly growing movement. Any one of you can truly bring this important topic to bear upon whatever state you are in this moment, and will overcome an important hurdle. Many of you may be stuck just in this painful inner confusion. Some of you may not know this consciously, others may feel it vaguely, still others may be quite aware of this struggle. Most human beings are totally oblivious of the fact that this very same battle rages in them, that this battle has created the instinctual restrictions and fear, the self-alienation, the aridity and impoverishment of the souls who cannot thrive in a climate of self-rejection. We cannot thrive in a climate of self-rejection. People also ignore that all the religious commands to love cannot be fulfilled until this dualistic split is healed and unification found, so that self-liking is no longer confused with self-indulgence, and honest self-confrontation need not bring self-loathing. You can find peace only when you can truly accept the ugliest in you and never lose sight of your intrinsic beauty. So there's one Q&A in this lecture, but let me pause here and see any comments or questions on this last bit here. Does this make sense? Are you seeing the beauty and the truth in all of this? So question. I feel a terrific battle going on right now in relation to my self-esteem. It feels like an atomic explosion. I realize I'm stuck in my own limitations. I realize that I can't stand pleasure. Coming from my habitual state of unpleasure, pleasure almost seems unnatural. So his answer, if you can conceive of yourself as the essence of life with all its incredible powers, possibilities, and inherent potentials, you will indeed know that you are deserving of your own esteem and acceptance. You will be able to see the traits you hate and still not lose sight of who you essentially are. I also suggest a specific exercise you might find quite helpful. Put down in writing everything that you dislike about yourself. Have it down in black and white. Look at those traits when they are written down. Then feel into yourself and ask, do I really believe that this is all there is to me? Do I really believe that I must be these traits all my life? Do I believe I have the possibility to love? Do I hold forces locked up in me that contain all the good imaginable? By raising these questions seriously, you will get an answer on a deeply feeling level, a level where the answer is more than a theoretical concept. You will experience a new power in you that you do not need to fear, and a new gentleness and softness that does not need hostility or other defenses. So were people kind of going into those questions a little as we read them? Should we go in with them a little bit more? Take a minute and just, think of at least one trait that you don't like about yourself. And then ask yourself, do I really believe that this is all there is to me, or this trait is, the death of me. Do I really believe that I must be this trait all my life? And again, he's saying, feel into these questions. Don't necessarily just try to answer them from your intellect. Do I believe I have the possibility to love? Do I hold forces locked up in me that contain all the good imaginable? Let's see, and this is something that, you can take into your own process and also your individual meditations a little more. And, hopefully, like it's kind of like in really questioning all of our inner voices, not believing any of them until we can actually study it and discern with our own highest inner authority if those voices contain truth or not. And usually, like the guide says, they have some truth, but they also contain some distortion. So we have to keep the truth, recognize what's true, but recognize also what's not and let it go. And bring into, that place the accurate truth, the true truth. So finally, unifying love and pleasure. You have recently come across in your personal pathwork a very specific misconception that makes loving impossible as long as you harbor it. When you mistakenly equate loving with the terrible danger of being totally impoverished, even robbed of your very life, how can you want to love? How can you let yourself love? According to this false idea, giving of yourself means losing what you give without ever being replenished. If this were true, love would indeed be impossible and giving a folly. Is it now conceivable for you to see that this is not so, that reality is different? And if you can see that love comes from the same inexhaustible well as wisdom, as all life does, can you further perceive that you will not need to deny your own natural instinct that wants to reach out, that wants the pleasure of feeling love, warmth, and giving of yourself? And can you still foresee the next natural organic step in the chain, which is that if you can love, you will inevitably love yourself? This is the reason why you fear pleasure. For pleasure not only seems entirely undeserved, but love and pleasure are interchangeable. True pleasure is loving, and without loving, pleasure just does not exist. If you harbor love feelings, your whole body is in a blissful vibration, with certainty, with security, with peace, with stimulation, with excitement in the most relaxed, pleasurable way. This cannot come through anything that is given to you when you are merely a recipient. It comes when you vibrate with this feeling. Nor does this mean that you do not also receive love. The giving and receiving become so interchangeable that it can often no longer be discerned which is which. Both become indistinguishable in one movement. But if your nature is as yet incapable of allowing the feeling of love, you must fear bliss, since bliss and loving are the same thing. The misconception that giving is losing causes you to close up and contract in all situations that might bring forth your natural instincts. When you deny love and pleasure, you must inevitably also deny your self-esteem. Your key must lie in seeking that your inability to love is not an inborn aspect that you alone harbor forever. It is a temporary block for loving based on some false premise that exists on a deeper level of your emotional experience. You can change this misconception any moment you truly and fully look at it. Be blessed, every one of you. Be in peace. Be what you are, honestly and truly, so that God manifests more and more in you. Okay, let's see. Stop the share. Any final questions, comments? Guess we lost a couple of people in our group, but so
It was good. I really liked it. And I was able to, my daughter was asking me, you know, where could she read this? So I found that on the Pathworks number 174 and sent it to her because she said, I guess for her, some of it, but reading it, you need a little bit more time to digest it and really have time to take it in deeply and think about it. But it was
absolutely,
really good. I really liked it. Thank you for presenting it.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've read these things lots of times, and every time I read them, I get more out of them, you know. So
Mhm.
take a lifetime to digest them. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.